Let's discuss ancient Rome, another lecture. Let's begin with the foundations. I am Alexei, and today we will examine how a small Latin settlement by the Tiber became, through layered institutions and a formidable military machine, the polity that organized a fifth of humanity at its height. It is worth noting that we shall move between plain description and, when needed, the more technical vocabulary historians actually use.
Hi, I'm Priyanka. I'm curious about how we can make this feel simple at first, and then build up to the complex pieces without losing the thread.
To frame our discussion, ancient Rome, in lay terms, is the long story of a community that starts as clustered hilltop villages around the 8th century BC, grows into a city ruled by kings, becomes a republic run by elected officials, and finally transforms into an empire under a single ruler while keeping republican window dressings. In simpler terms, it is the journey from huts on the Palatine to roads from Britain to the Euphrates. Along this path, we must know a few core ideas. The res publica, literally the public matter. The consul, an annually elected chief magistrate with command authority. The Senate, an advisory and later dominant council of elders. And the tribune of the plebs, the official empowered to defend common citizens with the veto.
So, moving on. Could you say those again, but a bit more like how we would see them on a syllabus? I think the formal connections matter.
Of course, in this context, res publica denotes a constitutional order without a monarch, where magistracies are time-limited, collegial, and legally constrained. Consuls hold imperium, which is the legal right to command armies and execute the laws. Typically, there are two, checking one another. The Senate, while theoretically advisory, curates long-term strategy, provincial assignments, and finance. And its auctoritas shapes outcomes even when statutes do not explicitly compel obedience. The tribune of the plebs, elected by the people, wields sacrosanctity and the power of intercessio, meaning a veto that can halt actions judged harmful to the plebeians. It is arguably the Republic's most distinctive break on elite overreach. Moving forward, why should we care? Well, Rome underwrites much of the legal and political grammar of our world. Latin births the Romance languages and saturates English vocabulary. Roman law informs civil codes from Europe to Latin America. And the Republican toolkit, with separation of powers and vetoes, is echoed in modern constitutions. It's important to understand, however, that Rome's political evolution is not a tidy morality play. Transitions from kingship to republic to empire involve contested legitimacy, improvised legal fixes, and at times, naked force.
Isn't it interesting how we often imagine a clean break between republic and empire? But there were long overlaps. I guess that misunderstanding hides the messy reality.
Exactly. Augustus styles himself princeps, first citizen, while holding decisive control through the army and key provinces. The facade persists even as substance shifts. This brings us to a few basic but memorable facts before we zoom into causes and counterfactuals. First, a surprising vignette. In AD 193, the Praetorian Guard literally auctioned the imperial throne to Didius Julianus, promising each guardsman a massive payout. The scandal lasted weeks before a frontier general, Septimius Severus, marched on Rome and ended the charade. Second, in AD 305, Diocletian does something Romans found almost inconceivable. He voluntarily abdicates and retires to his Dalmatian palace, having tried to normalize succession under a tetrarchy of 2 senior and 2 junior emperors.
Wow, the auction sounds like a satire. And yet, it happened. And Diocletian stepping down feels, oddly modern.
Chronologically, the scaffolding is straightforward. Traditional founding in 753 BC, a republic in 509 BC after expelling a king, expansion through Italy and then overseas via the Punic Wars, civil wars in the 1st century BC, and in 27 BC, Octavian becomes Augustus and inaugurates the imperial order that in the West ends conventionally in AD 476, and in the East continues to 1453 under what we call the Byzantine Empire. Before we enter the analytical core, a personal note. Well, you see, the first time I stood beneath the arches of an aqueduct, I realized Roman engineering is not merely stone, mortar, and mathematics. It is governance in physical form. A siphon or a vault is a promise kept, water arriving daily because budgets, law, and labor align. As an academic, I find that elegance persuasive. As we continue, three big questions will organize our exploration today. 1. What led to the fall of the Roman Republic? 2. What if Hannibal had defeated Rome decisively? 3. How did Rome manage multicultural integration across millions of subjects? Let's proceed to the first. The fall of the Republic is not a single event, but a convergence of structural stresses and opportunistic actors. Economically, conquests poured wealth into senatorial hands, while latifundia, worked by slaves, displaced smallholders. Socially, urban crowds became dependent on elite patronage. Institutionally, the Lex Claudia pushed senators out of commerce and empowered equestrian tax farmers, sharpening class frictions. Politically, the Gracchi brothers tried to rebalance land and citizenship but were killed, normalizing violence as a tool of policy. Militarily, Marius opened recruitment to the landless, professionalizing legions whose loyalty drifted from the state to the general who could promise land. The door to Sulla and Caesar marching on Rome stood ajar.
I think the next thing we should talk about is the Senate itself. Can we say that it failed? Or was it boxed in by events it could not control?
It's crucial to understand that the Senate's power was elastic. It relied on auctoritas and networks more than on statute. In good times, that soft power steered magistrates, courts, and provincial governance. In crises, however, ambitious tribunes could mobilize assemblies. Generals with legions could coerce outcomes, and the Senate's tools, decrees, prosecutions, delays, proved inadequate against organized force. Sulla's dictatorship briefly rearmed the Senate by curbing the tribunate and empowering senatorial courts, but at the cost of institutional terror via proscriptions. The precedent that violence decides constitutional questions could not be recalled. The first, and then the legally sanctioned second triumvirate, concentrated power outside the traditional framework. By the time Octavian became Augustus, republican forms remained, yet the decisive levers, armies, money, provinces, were no longer collegiate.
Building on that, was the populares versus optimates split like parties, or more like different strategies elites used?
More the latter. These were fluid alignments. Populares leveraged the assemblies and the tribunate to push reforms or personal agendas. Optimates relied on the Senate and courts to defend aristocratic prerogatives. Individuals crossed lines as circumstances demanded. The split, however, framed rhetoric and mobilized supporters, intensifying zero-sum tactics that eroded trust in shared rules. On to our next point, Hannibal's hypothetical victory. Historically, in the Second Punic War, Hannibal executed a brilliant Alpine crossing and devastated Roman armies at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae. But he failed to fracture Rome's Italian alliances decisively. Rome adapted, avoided pitched battles, and under Scipio Africanus carried the war to Africa, defeating Hannibal at Zama in 202 BC. Now, if we invert that outcome and imagine a decisive Carthaginian victory that forced Rome into client status, several implications follow.
From a different angle, what happens culturally? Does the Greco-Roman world we talk about even exist if Latin power never rises after that?
Arguably, we would see a Hellenistic Punic world rather than a Greco-Roman one. Carthage was a mercantile thalassocracy, its institutions oriented toward trade, tribute, and naval projection, not toward mass citizenship distribution or standardized municipal law across continents. Without Roman ascendancy, Latin would likely remain regional. Greek would continue as the lingua franca of high culture, and Punic commercial practices might frame Western Mediterranean norms. Roman road networks, veteran colonies, and wholesale legal integration, especially the later extension of citizenship culminating in Caracalla's edict, would be absent. The political map might remain a mosaic of Hellenistic kingdoms and Punic spheres of influence. Even the eventual channels through which Christianity later scaled imperial administration could look very different. But to be clear, counterfactuals map plausibility, not certainty. Let's shift focus to the third question. How did Rome manage multicultural integration? At base, Rome excelled at turning enemies into stakeholders. Mechanisms included graded legal statuses, such as Latin rights, municipal charters that replicated Roman civic forms, and the settlement of veterans as colonists to knit landscapes to the center. Magistracies and tax systems were standardized enough to be legible, yet flexible enough to co-opt local elites. The army itself became a pathway to advancement, and roads plus urbanization fostered shared habits.
Can we maybe now look at citizenship? The Edict of Caracalla seems huge, but what did it change day to day?
In AD 212, Caracalla grants citizenship to all free men with specific exceptions. Fundamentally, a centuries-old distinction between Romans and provincials collapses. We observe a broadened tax base, more uniform legal remedies, and a reframing of identity. A provincial landowner in Syria or Gaul is now, in law, as Roman as an Italian. Mary Beard memorably calls this, in effect, a new state under an old name. The move also simplifies military recruitment and estate transmission across regions. Yet integration did not erase friction. Tax farming abuses, regional revolts, consider Judea's catastrophic uprisings and later Hadrian's renaming of the province, and persistent local languages show limits to homogenization.
It makes me wonder about the practical challenges. Did Roman law really feel the same in, North Africa and in Britain? Or are we smoothing over local adaptations?
Clearly there is variation. Municipal charters differ. Private law interacts with local custom, and imperial edicts travel at the speed of horses. Areas for further research include how epigraphic evidence tracks the diffusion of Latin legal formulae, how tax regimes were negotiated in practice between governors, public contractors, and city councils, how veteran colonies reshaped landholding patterns, and how religious life syncretized local cults with imperial ideology. In simpler terms, the Roman recipe is a modular kit, not a single blueprint. Its success lies in repeatable parts that tolerate substitution. To summarize, ancient Rome is the arc from a Latin town to a multi-continental empire, with key institutions, consuls, senate, tribunes within a res publica, evolving into imperial governance under Augustus and successors. We examine three lenses: the republic's fall through social inequality, military professionalization, and political violence. A counterfactual Hannibalic victory that might have yielded a Hellenistic Punic rather than Greco-Roman world. and Rome's integration strategy culminating in universal citizenship under Caracalla, with persistent local diversity. For those wishing to extend the timeline, study the so-called Byzantine Empire. It is Rome by other means, enduring until 1453 and reframing many of these themes in a Christian and Eastern key. This then completes our present analysis. Thank you for listening, and as ever, keep asking precise questions, because precision is how the past yields its secrets.
Thank you, Professor. That was helpful to think through, actually.